Hello everyone, my name is Chris Kaplis. I'm the Executive Director of the MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics, and I'd like to welcome you to our monthly webinar. And today our topic is going to be on supply chain careers for professionals over the age of 30. And so even if you are not over 30 years old, hopefully you'll get something out of this and you'll be able to learn something about the MLOG and the ZLog programs. So we're very lucky to have a nice group of alumni here to talk about the programs. We have some from a wide range of industries, from consultancies, manufacturers, as well as the 3PL. And so before I introduce the panel, then what I would like to do is just give a quick background, some overview of the MLOG and the ZLog programs. So the MLOG and ZLog programs, the MLOG program was created 10 years ago, and the ZLog program 5 years ago, and they're very similar in how they're designed and operated. They're both 9-month on-campus master's degree programs. They're not certificate programs. They're very intensive, and they're very short-focused. That's why they're very attractive to people over the age of 30 who want to spend minimal time within an academic program to get back out into industry. They're designed specifically for supply chain management professionals who have some level of industry experience. This is important because the students will learn as much from each other as they do from their professors. The programs are designed to give all the students a system-wide and global perspective, the analytic problem-solving skills, and change leadership skills that are required for success in the supply chain management career. So the principles that fall out of this mission are keeping it short and focused. Again, it's 9-month programs. They're both on campus, whether at MIT here for the MLOG program or in Zaragoza, Spain for the Zaragoza Logistics program. In either case, they're on campus and you're there for 9 months, so it's less than a year. We keep it small and selective. Both programs, even though we each have over 200 plus applicants each year, we keep the cohorts each year to between 2 and 3 dozen. And we do that for a reason. We found that getting bigger than that, the classes tend to form cliques. And so we want to make sure that the first network that people pick up is that class itself. So we keep it as a very tight industry, a tight group. We also keep this very practical and real. We have very heavy industry involvement. The Center for Transportation and Logistics here at MIT has a corporate program with about 50 companies, and they are involved at many different levels with the students, whether working on their thesis projects, coming to teach classes, giving lectures, and also recruiting. We reach young professionals, young to mid-career, so we look for 3 to 8 plus years of experience, and today we're talking about those at the higher end of that scale. We have a global view. By design, these programs have at least half international students versus U.S. We also have an exchange which is global. So the students from the USA go to Spain, to the Zaragoza Center. The Zaragoza students come here to MIT for a portion of that. And as we just announced earlier this year, we opened our 3rd center in Bogota, Colombia, so the Latin America Center, and their students will start coming for this global exchange starting in 2010. So as we grow and get more of these international centers that we're starting as part of our global supply chain and logistics excellence or scale program, we'll have more global interaction, both in students, in the sponsoring companies, and in the research that we do. Then the other guiding principles are we focus on problem solving. We're MIT, so we're very strict on making sure people can solve the analytical problem, combining theory and making sure it works in practice. And then the last thing we really try to work on is to make sure that everyone has those leadership skills to be able to implement the change, implement the correction or the solution. We found that many engineers who come to this are not trained in those leadership skills and the ability to negotiate, persuade, and communicate, so that's something we've set up separate tracks for, both at the MLOG and the ZLog programs. So specifically to this webcast, just to give you some statistics, the average age of the programs, of the students in the programs, is about 30 years old, 29 to 31 years old. And in this year, over a third of the class of the ZLog class are over 30, and close to 43% of the MLOG class are over the age of 30. So if you are in that group, you're not alone. So we actually look for those type of students because we have found that the older students bring more experience and they can add more to the program, and that's what we're looking for. So that's a little bit about the program, but now I'd like to introduce the first of our panelist members, and I'm happy to introduce Matthew Harding. Matt is a project lead in distribution planning and engineering for Transplace, and he graduated from the program in 2005. So Matt, can you just quickly tell me something about your professional background, what you did before MLOG, and what you've done since MLOG?
Sure, Chris. I started my career in aviation, and which is interesting to start because in many ways my career has been non-traditional. So I think when Chris was looking for speakers, mine jumped out. So the road will sound a little bit like it's going in various directions, but it led to where I'm at, and I wouldn't change the path for anything. But very early on in the 80s, I worked for Loral Aerospace, and I was part of a government contract to train Navy pilots on advanced weapon systems. And so I worked on a military base and went through the rigors of training program for the military. From there, I went to Delta Airlines and was part of their training program in Atlanta. And then a very lucky thing happened to me. I was furloughed as part of a reduction in force at Delta in the early 90s, and had to ask myself some really tough questions about what I wanted to do with my career, where I wanted to be. So that opportunity allowed me to take a look at some of the simulation background I had seen from these training programs and think to myself, well, if I'm going to define my career, it would be good to use some of those experiences in advance, try to take with me that experience into a field that's engineering focused, which was my interest. So that led me to the industrial engineering program at Georgia Tech, and I worked in a number of places there at Georgia Tech, earned my degree in industrial engineering, and focused on the Center for Human Machine Systems Research. I was an employee, a student developer there, and also worked in process control and sort of an industrial engineer or process engineering, and developed systems in paper and steel, and did a lot of the interface work as well as the control systems that companies use to manufacture product. From there, I was, my experience at Georgia Tech really gave me some insights into kind of the elegance of math, and I became very much enamored with decision support systems and optimization, and that interest then led me out of more of a manufacturing industrial type of environment and up into Boston, where I focused on decision support software for the trucking industry for carriers and shippers. So that experience then brought me into a completely different world between negotiating, procurement, how to manage trucking assets, how to buy transportation, how to execute transportation if you're a shipper. And I think that from that moment forward, that's really when my career started to take shape. I was with Logistics.com, the Sabre Group, Manhattan Associates over a 10-year time span. Had the opportunity within that experience to come to MIT for the MLOG program, and at that time I had enough experience around optimization and sort of the two sides of the coin in terms of the elegance of math and the somewhat ugliness of reality and what it takes to make things work in a real business environment. So I came to MIT looking for insights on business strategy and what those types of topics or understandings that are necessary to kind of build out the last 20 years of my career versus some of those things you're focused more on the first 20 years. So I went to MLOG in 05, or graduated in 05. I was 37. It was a fantastic experience for me. Made a lot of really good friends, good contacts, and tried to be as involved as I could. And in terms of the different clubs and groups and sponsoring, speaker events for the students and things of that nature. So it was just a great experience. I'm currently now Vice President of Consulting at Transplace, and my responsibilities are all of engineering. So we have an engineering team that identifies value for our customers, and then I also work with our strategic carrier development group as well as our strategic account management group, and I have those responsibilities as well. Those are new responsibilities as of yesterday. So congratulations. Happy to say that my exposure to MIT has been just instrumental in combining the sort of tactical consultant type of understanding into helping a company forge the next chapter of their history, and it's just been a great experience. So hopefully I didn't take too much time, Chris, Be happy to answer any questions.
That was perfect, Matt. Let's continue through, and then we'll come back for more questions. So if anyone has questions for Matt or anyone specifically, just use the web interface to send me that question, and at the end I'll ask each person those questions. So if you have a question specifically for one of the panelists, please just detail that in the question. If it's for the whole panel, just let me know that as well. Okay. So Mike, you're next. So I'd like to introduce Michael Mulqueen. Mike was a class of 2006. He's currently at Accenture, where he's a senior manager in the supply chain management service line. So Mike, take it away.
Thanks, Chris. My background isn't nearly as diverse as Matt's. I started at UPS in 1989, working in their cartographic organization, and then quickly moved to their routing and scheduling application. So from 1990 on, I have been working primarily on transportation systems, different aspects and different types of systems, but essentially transportation systems. With UPS, I was there for 6 years, and I was primarily working on it's called last mile routing, essentially from distribution center to store in the wholesale distribution space. So I worked with a lot of big clients like Cisco Foods, U.S. Food Service, essentially any type of bar or restaurant or anything that gets deliveries from a wholesale distributor utilizes, or many of them utilize routing and scheduling tools. So that was my focus in the initial part of my career. In 1995, I moved over to a company called Manugistics. Manugistics was, along with I2, was one of the leaders in supply chain at that time. And that's actually the first time I actually heard the term supply chain. In 1995, I became a consultant doing TMS implementations. I implemented transportation management systems at companies like Canadian Tire. I did work with IBM, Lowe's, Intel, some 3PLs like Wincanton and XL Logistics, and got to really travel the world. Transportation is obviously a global type of business, so a lot of our clients were located in South America and Europe, and I got to see a lot of different operations. And ultimately, in the late 90s, I took over the product management responsibilities for all the transportation product line at Manugistics. That went along fine. Of course, Manugistics was one of those companies that had a 95% depreciation of their market cap. So the golden handcuffs kind of disintegrated, and I actually went back to UPS. And at UPS, I took over the product management responsibilities for their vehicle telematics solution, essentially GPS tracking, along with engine tracking and all kinds of interesting things that you can pull out and monitor. Real-time visibility into where all of your equipment is. You guys probably saw those old Nextel commercials, Agitate My Dots. That's essentially the types of systems that we were building. And I think I was probably 38. I had met Chris a couple times. We had crossed paths. I was 38, and I said, you know what? This is interesting what I'm doing here, but is it really meeting kind of my long-term needs? And I really broke it down into 3 different areas. Do I like what I'm doing? Am I really building equity in myself and my resume? And am I compensated fairly, or compensated to a point that is okay with me? And the answer to all 3 were kind of a shrug. I was doing okay on all those different aspects, and I thought, what would really make me happy? And what would really make me happy is impactful work. And I thought if I had impactful work, then the other things would fall in line. It would certainly build a brand for me. It would certainly help with my compensation, and it would certainly build equity in my resume. That's when I reached out to Chris, and we started talking. For me, MIT was a way to do a couple different things. It was a way for me to credentialize myself. Coming out, I didn't have an engineering background. Matt talks about elegant math. Chris Kaplis knows math was not my forte. So if you're not an engineer, don't worry. You can actually get through this program, although you'll probably spend about 3 times more time on your problem sets than the normal person. But the ability to essentially work to the point where things that were not clear to you become clear. That was one of the things that I never really anticipated getting out of MIT. Again, when I first joined, I really needed to credentialize myself. Being a marketing major wasn't going to cut it for me. Building the network. Chris talked about the class being your network. Well, that's certainly the case, but don't underestimate. You're going to be working with some of the best supply chain minds in the world, Chris Kaplis included. He's one of the brightest guys you'll ever want to meet. Yossi Sheppy, Sanjay Sarma, Charles Fine. These guys are the rock stars of supply chain. So if you're interested in this, you're going to be learning from really the very, very best. So using that, the criteria that I really looked at, the three criteria I talked about before, it was met. So the program also, being a one-year program, was something that, as Chris mentioned before, being over 30, taking 2 years off for an MBA is a huge commitment. Getting this done in 9 months is something that it's somewhat painful, but it's doable and it's worth it. So after I graduated from Accenture, or excuse me, from MIT, I moved. I initially went and was the director of transportation systems at a wholesale distributor called C&S Wholesale Grocers. I stayed there for about a year and then found a better opportunity at Accenture. And at Accenture right now, I'm doing the impactful work that I always had hoped to do. I'm working with the U.S. Postal Service. My client has a $6 billion budget. I'm working on various projects that have the potential to save 9 figures for the U.S. Postal Service. I'm really getting to the point where I'm a trusted advisor with some of the top leadership. So it's exactly what I had hoped to get out of it. That's about it.
Great. Okay, great, Mike. Okay, let's continue on with Kushal. So Kushal Panda was a ZLog graduate from the class of 2006. He's now at Nike, and so Kushal, tell us something about your career and what took you to ZLog.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. So my career also, perhaps like Mike has in different ways. Started my career way back in '96 when I graduated from the Regional Engineering College in the south of India at Trichy. And as a fresh engineer, of course, my first love was to work in the industry with which I've done the engineering. So I started working for Reliance Petrochemicals in Hazira and in Mumbai. So that continued for around 3 years, and it was a very fulfilling experience then because once there. Then after 3 years, I kind of evaluated my options and thought, okay, so what I learned in my school, I've implemented it. The plants are commissioned. Do I see myself working in shifts, or do I see myself doing something more? And then I thought, okay, let me try and broaden my knowledge. So I went ahead and got myself enrolled in the School of Management at IIT Bombay, and that kind of widened my perspective. I took up courses in finance and learned a bit about brands and kind of got myself ready for taking the next step. The next step was to start working for a FMCG company by the name ITC, where I worked for 4 years between 2001 and 2005. And that experience was also amazing because I started working as a logistics manager in the factory in Bangalore, responsible for material management at the warehousing, for shipping, and for production planning. And I think it was valuable because this plant is kind of at the heart of what happens in the organization, very important to the organization, and being at a place and then coordinating the whole flows of materials in the factory and out of the factory was a valuable experience. So I worked there in the factory for a year, then moved to procurement in the head office in Calcutta, did that work for around a year, and my third year I found myself moving into distribution planning, network design, figuring out where we should position our warehouses, how can we reduce costs. So it was a very good mix of having seen the factory, worked in procurement, and then extending it into the distribution planning and warehouse location kind of exercise. And at that stage in 2005, then I questioned myself, okay, I've gone, from petrochemical into logistics. I've experienced in 3 different areas, so what's the next logical step for me? And that's when I started looking at the net, trying to figure out, what are the courses I can enroll myself. And I came across these courses, these 9-month ZLog course in Spain. And I thought, okay, I already have a master's with me, so I should not be looking at putting another 2 years into a master's course, and this just fit into that requirement quite beautifully. So I thought, okay, let me get into this, finish this off in 9 months, and then I can perhaps also take my career international. When I went into the school, I was not too sure whether I would work in the West or whether I'll go back, but then as I started interacting with the students and the professors and got enrolled myself in the recruitment exercise at both MLOG and ZLog, I realized that it was a golden opportunity for me to actually start talking to a lot of these companies in the West, and then that's where I got interviewed with Nike, and then I started working for Nike in 2006. And the first 1 year was more the kind of rotations to get exposure into different areas of supply chain within Nike. And then for the last 1 year, I've been working as a replenishment manager, focusing mainly on performance improvement, process improvement, and also on the last mile improvement, where I'm trying to implement RFID related smart fixtures in the last mile.
Great.
So that's
Thanks.
briefly about what I've done in the 9 years of my career. As I said, yeah, it started off in petrochemical, went into FMCG, and now I'm in the sports industry. But if I see the last couple of years, it has been more in logistics and then gone on to supply chain. So, yeah, when I got into my career as an engineer, I started working in petrochemical. I was not too sure what I wanted, but at this stage I can surely see where my career is heading, and I think that's perhaps an advantage with, yeah, I can call it an advantage with people who have put in some years, that you can see yourself working somewhere where you have a great passion and you really love doing, and you find just yourself settled in that area in your career.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Kushal. And let me go to our last panelist, to Randy Fike. Randy is also in the class of 2005 up at MLOG, and he is currently a vice president at Alex Partners. So Randy, tell us a little bit about yourself and your career path so far.
Great, thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Before I kind of go into my background, just about a couple things. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to prospective MIT, MLOG, and ZLog students, because the folks that come through MIT really are the future of supply chain. And I think a lot of this industry, I think a lot of this function, and it's just great to see the new students that come through. The second thing is the actual photo is incorrect. Actually, I look like a young Brad Pitt. So when you guys hear me talk, just don't focus on the middle-aged bald guy. Focus on a young Brad Pitt, and that'll make me feel better than that photo that went up. But if you take a look at sort of my background, so I went to MIT. I spent 12 years with the International Paper Company. Actually, my undergraduate degree is in tax accounting, which is probably a very unusual undergraduate degree for supply chain. But I went to International Paper, spent 12 years, went through various senior finance positions. At one point in time, ran one of their divisions, but made the switch over to supply chain, and have loved it ever since. And before I came to MIT, I eventually ended up as the manager of supply chain for North America. After MIT, did a couple years at McKinsey & Company, focusing almost exclusively on supply chain with some procurement work. After McKinsey, went to Lexmark, the printer maker, where I was the senior manager for worldwide supply chain strategy, and took them through a global redesign of their supply chain. And then now, of course, I'm at Alex Partners as the vice president. And if I tried to maybe sum up sort of my experience and the experiences that you just heard, is that there's not one set career path to supply chain. It's a diversity of career paths. And what you do in supply chain and what you do with an MIT degree is also about diversity. You heard some people focusing on optimization. You heard some folks focusing on transportation. You heard folks talking about industry. I use supply chain as a mechanism to save companies that are either going to go into bankruptcy, or divisions that are going to be spun off or shut down. So, what you do with supply chain, how you come there, there's a diversity of experiences. What you do with it, there's a diversity of experience. And really in supply chain, you have to be able to go high to low. Strategy work, turnaround work, day-to-day execution, and then all the way down to optimization. And I think that, to me, that's the strength of MIT, is MIT gives you a diversity. I mean, it gives you a diversity through the classes that you take, but I think as importantly, it gives you a diversity of the people that you work with. So MIT is not everybody's 25, 26 years old. It is a good diversity of people with a good diversity of backgrounds, and that's what you'll see in the supply chain world. So as we go through, and especially as I talk about my experiences and Chris throws out questions, I'm really focusing on the diversity aspect, and that there is not a set way to get there. there's not a set way of what you do your electives at MIT, and there's not a set way of what you do afterwards. And to me, that's the beauty of working in supply chain.
Great.
Chris,
Thanks, Randy.
That's my entry.
Oh, okay. Thanks. I appreciate it, and I want to apologize for putting the wrong picture of you on the web.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Must be from your father or something, apparently.
It is. It is.
So, Randy, I have a question for you. You made probably the biggest switch. You went from tax accounting into supply chain, which can be a pretty big jump. So what were the difficulties you found there, and what did you find in the MLOG program that made that easier? How was that transition overall?
You know, and fortunately for me, when I was making that transition, that people, supply chain was really starting to take hold in industry and stuff. I would say that first of all, I'll say what was the strengths of going over there and what's the challenges. The strength of going over there is the ability to problem solve, because that's what supply chain is about. I don't care whether you're working on strategy, optimization. You have to have the ability to problem solve, and you have to have the ability to have impact. If you don't do those two things, you just are doing tactical execution. I would say the bigger hurdle is having the credibility of going over and sitting down as a supply chain professional, and that credibility is gained by not only having experience in the field, but also it's gained by your credentials in the field. And that's one of the reasons that took me to MIT, beyond just the experiences, is to become a true supply chain professional. So that now when I go in and I sit down with people and I talk about supply chain, when they see experience, which comes by both age and also what you've done in industry, but quite frankly, when they see MIT, you walk into the room with instant credibility that's either there for you to use or lose. So it cuts through a lot of the basic stuff that you have to do. So going to finance, going to supply chain, ability to do analytics, be able to do problem solving, be able to have impact, got to have that. The challenge of making the move was, quite frankly, sort of the credibility of going into the room, which, MIT is a great door opener to get you that credibility. Okay,
great. Matt, I have a question for you, but I want to remind the audience, please email us questions or send us questions in using your web application. And if there's someone specifically you want to ask a question to, just address it to them, and I'll play moderator. I have a question for you, Matt. When you were coming back and making the decision to come back to school, there are many options out there for either an MBA or other programs. And the choice between doing an MBA or the MLOG degree, what made you choose the MLOG over the MBA, or was that even a decision?
Well, it wasn't a decision factor for me. I didn't have to make a decision between one or the other. I chose the engineering degree because I believe that having that consistency to some extent, I knew I wanted to be in supply chain. I knew that I was less interested in marketing or finance or being a generalist. And for me, it was really taking the experiences I had as a consultant in between some of these very complex decisions, difficult decisions, and understanding the process of changing a supply chain, and I really wanted to just nail, drive that stake into my resume that said, I made this decision. I didn't just wander in here, into this career, and this is something I wanted to focus on. So I was really more, very lucky actually to be in an environment in a time in my career around great people where I could really put a catalyst into my career path. And the other thing that Randy was talking about, do with the credibility what you will. To some extent, the MIT halo effect is real. I tend to downplay that because I believe it's kind of like basketball. You don't need everyone to be 7 foot tall, but as long as we're all at least 6 feet tall, we can play a competitive game. So I try to downplay it because you really have people that they can go overboard on the MIT aspect of your background, and at the end of the day, it's just people getting things done. But I will say it's very nice to have the recognition, of both the focus and the program and what that program's set to do, in addition to where it comes from. So for me, it's worked out great.
Okay. Well, anyone else want to comment on that, the decision between MBA or the MLOG or the ZLog, the decision you had to make between those two?
Chris, I'll chime in as someone who's actually hired a lot of supply chain professionals, and I'll couch this in terms of I think the MBA is an absolutely great degree. So none of this is intended to lower the value of an MBA. But as a hiring manager, there's only so much an MBA can do for me in supply chain because they don't know supply chain. Very smart, you get a good business background, but even an MBA with a supply chain concentration really means that you've taken sort of a few introductory classes in supply chain. So if I'm hiring a supply chain person, I need a supply chain professional, so I'm going to go to degrees that have actually focused on that. And because those are people that can go deep. I mean, they can actually solve supply chain problems quickly. They know what they're doing. They've actually been able to move beyond sort of the lingo of reading a few books and some articles. So that's why I chose MIT versus an MBA. I felt that I could get a broad-based background within industry and business, or I could also take some other classes. But to really be a supply chain professional and go deep, I needed the focus of an MIT degree in logistics. And it's actually been very valuable because I solve problems every day that I go back to presentations that were given at MIT, my books at MIT, and the class lectures. So it's actually a lot of practical application that's allowed me to actually be a supply chain professional and have impact with my clients and also have impact within industry.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Kushal, any thoughts on that, the decision between MBA or MLog or ZLog, and specifically if you could comment on why you chose ZLog versus MLog?
Yeah, so for me, I had a Masters of Management from IIT Bombay. So and I truly agree with whatever panelists have said that okay, with an MBA you are really broadening your knowledge and you're doing a lot of different stuff. You would do brands and you do finance and you do strategy. But then I think what ZLog and MLog offer is perhaps a deep immersion in very specific subject, that's supply chain. And then while you're doing that, you do all that. You do a lot of optimization exercises. You do a lot of subjects like logistics engineering where you had a lot of these problems. You do a lot of case studies. So you tear apart companies like Walmart, Zara, and you see why these companies have been successful. You look at different case studies and figure out what these companies who are good in supply chain, what are the things that they are doing and how do they do it. So I think for me it was taking a deep dive in one area, and so they say it's kind of a T-shaped manager. So you broaden your horizon by doing an MBA, but then you actually need to dive deeper and take it deeper into one area and learn it and be very comfortable. As Mike also mentioned, that on a day-to-day basis you should be very comfortable dealing with nitty-gritties of the numbers and the details, and then at the same time be able to zoom up and go to the strategy level and think, okay, I'm doing this, but then does it align with the overall strategy of the organization? So I think that's the big connection for me. So I had an MBA and then I took the deep dive, and I'm quite comfortable in kind of going into the reports, running a query and coming up with data and converting that into some information and putting that into my presentations where I could be talking about the next 3 years plan. So I think that's the kind of comfort that ZLog gave me. And I think for me, why ZLog? Yeah, I think Spain is a great location. So any day, going to Spain is.
The weather is certainly much nicer in Spain than in Boston. I can tell you that right away, and the food as well.
So yeah, being in Netherlands now, it's nice back to the school, and Spain, it's always lovely.
Okay. So the next question, we have someone asked a question, say what's the biggest difficulty that all the panelists that you experienced as older students when you came back to school compared to the younger ones? Do you see any things where you had an advantage? Did you anything that caught you as a negative? Does anyone want to feel that, the differences between you and the younger students when you're back in the program?
Sure, Chris, I'll jump in. So I think, I'll answer that and say there's advantages and disadvantages. There's advantages and challenges of coming back as an older student. The advantages is that the stuff that you're learning, the interactions and stuff, you can put into lots more real-world context because you've probably seen or actually been involved in a situation like you're discussing in the classes that you can harken back to. So I think that's a big advantage. To me, the challenge, quite frankly, was just it'd been a long time since I'd done math. And the beauty of the MIT program is you have to sit down and you have to problem solve and you have to do the robustness of supply chain. So if it's been a while since you've done math, it takes you a little bit longer to get up to speed. You're going to have to put in a little more work. But on that, I would say that it'd been 13 years since my undergraduate, and my undergraduate was not a heavy math focused, I was still able to make it through the program and still be able to do the problem solving. So as an older student, to me the math part and getting brushed up on that was probably the most challenging.
Hey Chris, this is Matt. In terms of advantages for me, I think had I been younger, I think my view of faculty would have been, here's a very smart person who's given me work to do and I have to get good grades. And I think coming at it from, where I was in my late 30s, those real-world experiences you have in your career, you realize that the faculty are uniquely positioned to be the gatekeepers of a lot of different people, and as such are very good sources of understanding the professional network. And so from my perspective, coming in as an older student, it was clear to me that MIT was so much more than the degree and the work. It was more about the fact that the faculty are just a very critical component of tapping into a network within industry, finding other students that have similar challenges, at different, in different positions or different companies. And so I think I'm actually pleased that I did it after my 30th birthday because of the things that you see as you start to understand the effects of the networks and what a professional network can do for your career.
Okay, that kind of dovetails into another general question that I had from someone from the audience, and they asked specifically, since MIT, MLOG, and ZLog focus on diversity, is there a certain percentage of admissions that I allocate for older students? Is there an old person's quota, so to speak? And they're really you guys don't have to respond to that. There isn't. But like everything we do here at MIT and what most people do in practice, we manage things on a portfolio. So I like to have a diverse class in terms of age, experience, gender, nationality, race, creed, everything. We try to really bring diversity in. And so will there be some above and then this older, standard deviation or two above the mean? Sure. But it's also balanced with a percentage that's below. But I never go in with a hard number to look for 4 or 5 people above a certain age. But just as a general rule or statistic, the median age is about 29 to 30. So just by definition, about half the students will be right at 30 or above, and about half will be at 30 or below. So we try to mix this up, but I do not have a hard number that I try to go to. Someone else had a specific question about their background, and they're a marine engineer, spent a lot of time on different ships, and wanted to know how that would impact their experience here. And I think that parallels with a lot of the panelists' experience. It's not necessarily that you have to be working in all areas of supply chain, but having some experience that you can then use that to apply and bring to the table. I think it makes you very attractive, certainly to the program, but even beyond when you start looking for a job afterwards. But let me ask a question out to the crowd again, and Mike, I'll let you lead off with this. How was the job search for you at the end of the program or during the program? Because this is a 9-month program, it's very short, and as an older student, it isn't necessarily that you would fit the target for a lot of companies coming to campus to recruit. So tell us a little bit about how your job search took place during this time.
Yeah, it was actually very enjoyable to watch this process because coming out, being a little bit older, I had a good network to begin with. I was not concerned about getting a job, and it was fun watching the 24-year-olds constantly worry about who's coming to campus and who they should be interviewing with, et cetera. So I was in a really good position. The first semester didn't pay any attention to it at all. My focus was on learning. My focus was on making sure that I was getting as much out of this program as possible. This wasn't just going to be a catalyst for me to switch jobs. This was something I really wanted to learn. For me, the program does an unbelievable job of bringing in top-ranked companies during the January period. I think we had, 16, 17 different companies come in. Nike was one of the companies, International Paper, all of the consultancies came in the fall period. It was essentially, it was easy picking. I believe in the 2-week period I had 12 or 13 interviews. I actually had to cut off all the interviewing because it was becoming too hectic. Within 2 weeks of my first interview, I had 2 different job offers, and I had a bunch of second interviews that I ultimately stopped because I knew I was going to take one of those 2. So it was exceedingly easy. The organizations that were brought in were all first-class organizations, all organizations that you'd be proud to work for, and I think that the organizations were coached to know that MLOG is not an MBA program. You're going to get a wide variety of people there. You're going to get 25-year-old, really, really bright kids, and you're going to get 38-year-old, not so bright, but experienced kids. So they knew what they were looking for, and they had different positions available for different levels. So, like I said, it was shooting fish in a barrel.
Okay, and anyone else want to comment on their job search and how being a slightly older student, older than the mean, how that impacted what they did?
Chris, I'm not sure. It's interesting is, when I sort of mirror the earlier comment, I didn't really sweat looking for a job because I knew when you're coming as you're older and you're getting a supply chain degree, and especially a supply chain degree from MIT, the opportunities will come. As an older student, I think you're actually positioned better because you have access to more senior positions. So, a typical recruiter coming to campus might be looking for a younger student, but they're also looking for a lot more junior entry-level position. When you come to MIT as an older student, and you're getting the experience of MIT, the opportunities open up to you. They might be a little fewer in numbers than a younger student, but they're far more attractive opportunities. And you really do get exposure to, the consultancies that need supply chain, industries that's coming in and looking for manager, senior manager, director positions. So some of the same process, more lucrative looking positions, and even those recruiters that are interviewing for junior level positions, they also have to go back and they have to fill more senior level positions. So getting in front of them, even if it's for a position that you might necessarily be attracted to, they're going to go back and they're going to say, hey, geez, I just interviewed this guy at MIT. He's got experience. We have a director's position open or we have a senior manager's position open. You need to interview this guy. So in summary, the opportunities come the way, and I think that the opportunities are far more attractive than for younger students, and they're also far more attractive than what you would see without coming to MIT.
Okay. Hey, Chris, this is Matt. Staying on the thread of non-traditional, for all of those on the call who are looking at this type of decision, the approach that I took was a little bit different in that I had actually structured a deal, if you will, an agreement with my employer at the time to pay a portion of my salary as a student. And the condition was that I would give them a year contract to come back and work with the company. So for me, I didn't have to recruit, and I gave a year for my current employer. The thing that made it work was that the program was so integral to their strategy and what they were trying to do as a company in terms of how they were building talent. So there were some things that made that possible that were a little more related to timing. But depending on where you're sitting from, there may be options to consider depending on how strategic in nature the MLOG program would be to your current employer. That said, there were a lot of some of the younger students as well as the older students who found positions that were just fantastic positions in companies with fast track executive programs and things of that nature that that you kind of forego when you lock into your current employer. So it's a trade-off. It's a decision that you make on an individual basis. But for me, it worked out really well.
Just to add one more thing, the way that I tried to monetize this. When Chris first asked me to talk about this, in the end, compensation is relatively important. It varies for each person, but for me, it's relatively important. And I monetized it. I went back and I took a look at what my average salary increase would be from the time that I joined MLOG up until now. And at this point in time, I believe I'm making about 31, 32% more than if I did not do the program.
That's great. So are you going to start sending me a check, Mike?
I do every year, buddy.
That's great. We have a related question for you, Randy, that kind of fits to this, because, again, you made a major kind of a career shift for this. And someone asked a question, how do you guard against not having your previous experience that is not in supply chain valued? How do you guard against being stuck in a junior position to make sure you get to a senior position, even though supply chain might be a little new for you, you still have a lot of experience in maybe an unrelated industry? What are your thoughts on that?
So I would say that, when I say so solving supply chain problems are solving business problems, but you can go deep in supply chain, but that's not to say that you can't have a diversity. To have senior positions in supply chain in a company, you'll actually see that those folks come through different paths, right? Because they have to be able to solve business problems wide, but they also have to go through deep. So if you actually have spent time in a finance role, in a general manager's role, or an engineering role, prior to, I would say, your actual experience in supply chain or your formal education, that is a positive, it's not a negative. Because those senior supply chain positions in business are people that have a diversity of background, but they also have a spike in supply chain. So I would not look at that as a negative, because it's actually very much a positive. Because if you go to those positions and they look on your resume and you were a controller, you were a general manager, you were an engineer, you operated a line in a manufacturing plant prior to getting your supply chain experience, that is very much a selling point. And that's just not me saying that through interviewing on campus, recruiters, consultancies, et cetera. So that's actually a positive. And you actually want to play that up in your interviews wherever you go in life in supply chain.
Great. Let me ask a general question to the panel. With the current economic conditions, the threat of bankruptcy, the home mortgage crisis, and the credit crisis going on, how are you finding this impacting your supply chain career or what you're currently doing? Are you seeing this as how is this impacting what you're currently doing? Matt, do you want to start us off on this?
Yes. Well, we're integral to the supply chain here as a 3PL. We manage transportation networks for many companies, the size of Microsoft, Del Monte, lots of retail, CPG, and as well as companies like Cummins who do manufacturing. So while business is down, the focus on cost containment and the focus on improving the business operation in this changing environment has only escalated the focus on our services and what we do. And I think that it's like the old adage with when things are good, there's less focus on. I don't know if that's an old adage or not, Chris. I'm sure you can correct me on it. There's one I'm trying to search for here for the group. But when things are good, there's much less scrutiny on operations and the way things are working. And I think the cycle that we're coming into now, companies really have to focus on their operations, with much more intensity to prevent unnecessary or inefficient activity. So for us, being in supply chain, being in what is considered a down market, has really, I don't want to say our company is recession-proof. Certainly we have limits in terms of, or we have transactional types of models in our business that when the transactions slow down as a result of a shift in the building materials sector, then we feel that end of it. But we're winning a lot of business, and a lot of what we do on my team in terms of engineering and evaluating supply chains is in more demand now than ever. And we're currently adding 5 master's science students onto our team here in Arkansas starting in January. So we're in a hiring spurt, and we've closed a lot of new business here in the past few months with a much fatter pipeline at this point of the year than we had last year. So it's great. It's the timing it seems to be good. I seem to be in a good spot for these types of this shift. And I think supply chain is one of those areas where you're either growing and you have to establish a new supply chain, or if there's a contraction, then you're looking at consolidating. So it's not something that goes away based on the business environment. You just change your focus, whether you're in growth or trying to maintain your business.
Great. Well, Randy, you're headquartered or you're based in Detroit. So how is this impacting your supply chain career?
Our clients are growing and it's booming. And if you take a look at supply chain, first of all, I'll separate supply chain professionals from people who just do tactical execution. And MIT trains supply chain professionals. Tactical execution people could get caught up in general headcount reductions, but as a supply chain professional, to me it's just the nature of the work changes, right? When things are booming, even back in industry, it's a heavy focus on the customer, right? It's the customer experience, it's how do you win by service differentiation. In a down economy, it becomes lots more cost focus. And the more the economy goes down and the more that companies struggle, both in my time in industry, because I did this multiple times with International Paper or as a consultant, supply chain becomes more and more and more important because you're not going to fundamentally change your cost structure by laying off some clerks or doing that nonsensical game. You literally have got to get supply chain people in a room and take out nodes, make things faster, set down DCs, take out inventory. So, I mean, our business is booming. But if I was back in International Paper and industry, my supply chain people, they would be fully employed and they would be booming too, because I'd have all kinds of divisions calling me up and say, I've got to take 10, 15, 20% out of my cost structure, and the only way I can do it is by redesigning my supply chain. So it's somewhat counter-cyclical from that perspective.
Sure. Okay. Well, we're almost done, so what I'd like to do is ask each of you one last question. I'll start with you, Kushal, and then turn it to you, Mike, and then Matt, and we'll finish up with you, Randy. And it's just really quickly, in a minute or so, what advice would you give someone who is just above 30 or slightly older than the typical student who's considering either switching their career to coming back to education? What is the one piece of advice you'd give them? So what do you think, Kushal?
My one sentence advice would be just go for it. It's a wonderful career opportunity. The impact that you can create in an organization is tremendous. It's complex because you're not limited to just one function, but you're connecting the organization end to end. So yeah, for me, it's starting with the line plan and putting the product onto the shelf. So the number of touch points in the organization are humongous, enormous. So I think, yeah, I would just say this, go for it, and it's enjoyable. And if you have a passion for it, there's no doubt that you'll be very successful.
Great. Mike?
Yeah, I go back to kind of a self-assessment. For me, and I think this is actually valid for everybody. Maybe you weigh each one of these areas slightly differently. But do you like what you do? Are you well compensated? And are you building equity in your own brand? And are you building equity in your resume? And if you are happy with what you're doing and you could answer affirmative to all three of those questions resoundingly, then you know what, maybe this isn't the right time to do it. But if you're like me and you said, you know what, there's bigger and better things out there, this program is probably the best way if you want to focus on supply chain for you to get there.
Okay, Matt, what's your one piece of advice?
I'll try to stick to one. I would say that if the nature of your personality is to reach some level of achievement, whether it's in terms of your career or whether it's in terms of your paycheck, MIT is going to bust on barriers that just in ways that are hard to imagine until you go through it. So my one piece of advice is shoot for MLOG if that's something that you're shooting for, and when you come out, seek 2 to 3 year assignments because as you start looking at executive opportunities, they're going to want to see some diversity in addition to that strong degree. So I would, it's not the type of degree that you earn and want to come out and have the same job for 10 years. It's the type of degree that you earn and then you start building an executive portfolio, which is taking on responsibilities in different areas and or looking for different employment opportunities. But it's not the kind of thing you come out of and look for stagnation. So my advice is do it, and then sample the world, and then you'll be recognized for the background and the experiences as part of your executive goals.
Great. And Randy, bring us home. What's your one piece of advice?
I'd have to say two, but they're closely related.
Okay.
The first one is the stuff that you guys are kind of worrying about. To not really worry about it, right? I mean, you're going to get at MIT. You're going to get a great educational experience. You're going to be around extremely bright people. You're going to learn a lot from the faculty. You're going to get great opportunities outside of MIT. I know that's the calculus you're doing in your mind, but those things will occur. The advice I have on whether you want to do this or not, it just depends upon, do you want to do supply chain? Because if you really want to do supply chain, that's the place to go to up your game, and you're thoroughly going to do it. So it needs to be a personal choice of, do you want to work in this field? And if you do, MIT is a wonderful place to go.
Great. And on that note, I couldn't agree with you guys anymore. I mean, that's you said everything. I want to thank all you guys for that. Kushal, thank you. Mike, Matt, Randy. And at this point, I'd like to close out. Just to let you guys know, I appreciate the audience attending. This was probably our most well-attended webinar we've had so far this year, which is a testament to us old people. But if you want more information, you can contact the MLOG program. Just you see the website on the screen, or the ZLog program as well. Or you can always contact me directly at kaplis@mit.edu. And let us know what you think. Please contact us. We can set up a time for you to come and talk to current students, talk to alumni, to see if this is something that is right for you. Anyway, thank you for attending today, and I look forward to seeing everyone's application, hopefully seeing you here in the program next year. Thank you, guys.